We're going to hang out with Andreas Schlosser, and that can only mean one thing. Hi, I'm Ian Thain. Welcome to another SAP CodeTalk. As I say, I have Andreas with me. Andreas, thank you for joining me.
Good morning, Ian. Great to be here again.
And as I said, when we hang out with Andreas, it only means one thing. It means there's an update coming. So guys, you would have seen that we've gone to the SDK for iOS 3.0 SP01. So I had to think about it then, Andreas. So tell me, whenever we think of a new update with the SDK for iOS, I think about anything we need to be aware of with Xcode and Swift. Can you let us know what's happening with that?
Yeah, so this time, actually, this is good news. As you're saying, we had this in the past, that new Xcode versions coming out, binary incompatibility being a bit troublesome and all this stuff. This time, we have Xcode 10.1 out for quite a while. It's still there. And we are also using this for our latest SP01 release that just came out. It's still based on Swift 4.2, and things will just continue nice. Even though I think most of you are aware already that there has now been a new Xcode 10.2 beta been published a couple of days ago. That includes the new Swift 5 that will come out very soon. So whenever this will eventually go productive, of course, we will be prepared. We'll release a new patch for Xcode 10.2 and Swift 5, which is binary incompatible to Swift 4.2. But for now, we can just keep going. The good news is, though, that it has been announced that Swift 5 will include binary compatibility, hopefully also module compatibility, and then going forward for the next 20 years or so, we'll be fine, right? Also, if you now want to install the new SDK, we've made things a bit easier in terms of adding frameworks to your projects. So you may want to check this out. That now, if you have an assistant project that you're sharing via Xcode, via GitHub repositories, where you probably don't upload the frameworks themselves because of size, the assistant now has a new feature that you can actually do a right click and open with assistant in the Finder. And then if the project has been generated with the assistant will automatically add back the latest frameworks in. So that will be a very nice, convenient feature, I think, if you know, start installing and using the new assistant to get going and get upgraded. So check this one out.
Cool. So you are always very, very good at creating blogs. So guys, there is a blog that goes a little bit deeper into what Andreas is going to talk about next. And I'm quite interested to hear about machine learning. So let's hit that first subject.
Yeah, Ian, now what you will notice if you extract the new frameworks from this from this release that's just out, you'll see that there's one new framework called SAP ML, as in machine learning. This is our first small step towards supporting more machine learning capabilities in the SDK. This time, we are focused on supporting OCR text recognition capabilities in the frameworks. This comes with UI components that implement the Fiori for iOS design to show you a nice view with the bounding box where you should place the text to be recognized. You'll get the text overlay of recognized text in there. And then once control comes back in your app, you can then do with the recognized text whatever's appropriate in the context where you're using it. The SAP ML framework has additional dependencies on other frameworks. So if you do the export frameworks from the assistant, you'll see that there's another SAP ML dependencies folder. So if you decide to include SAP ML and check this out, you'll also want to add all these other frameworks in. There's, of course, installation instructions and all of that in our docs. It's important to note that the assistant generated app itself does not include the SAP ML framework because we are not using or exposing SAP ML functionality yet in the generated app. So we want to avoid that the app is blowing up for no reason. But of course, you can just add it manually and try things out. As I'm saying, this is the first step towards machine learning with limited functionality right now. So we're very curious to see what's happening there, to learn about requirements and then collect feedback on this new feature and specifically.
Excellent. So whenever also there's a new SDK for iOS, we have some new Fiori for iOS controls. So what about the UI side?
Yeah, right. So yeah, we don't have only UI controls for machine learning. We also added stuff in the core Fiori for iOS design implementation. We invested another round of features in the maps environment. So now we can also render routes on maps with different points of interest along the route, and we can cluster them together. You can drill in. You can drill into the details of your waypoints on a route on the maps. And with these enhancements, it's relatively straightforward to show and render routes on maps. Last time, we've also introduced the geospatial object creation and editing capabilities. We've invested a bit more there so that the overall UX, when you drag and drop and scroll and edit, is a bit nicer and better. And we've also added the new location form cell to the SDK so that you can now also include the small snippets of geospatial objects in your broader forms where you create objects or attachments or whatever you're working on. So this is now very nice, convenient. It closes a small gap that we had there. Favorite charts. We added a couple more chart types also in this release. Now we can also render area charts as well as bubble and scatter charts if that's what you need for your type of visualization. It's very similar in terms of APIs as the other chart types, so it should be very easy to adopt if you're using charts already. If you're not having charts in your app, you're including charts in your app. And a minor enhancement that we did on the text edit and input cells is that we now also allow to auto format input. So if you have known structures like phone numbers, we can add the right parentheses and dashes. As a developer, you can do this now. We can also branch off and launch icons for text editing to provide alternative input mechanisms. So you can imagine that there's now a little barcode scanning icon or camera icon. And when you tap on this, we will bring up a barcode scanner, or if you tap on the camera, you could envision that we bring up the OCR view and recognize text and use that recognized text to bring it back into the text input field. And on top of all of that, we've also added a couple additional languages. You can check out my blog and the documentation for the long list of languages that we support now. But that's just to round this off and keep adding languages as we see demand.
Excellent. Do love languages, do love sort of supporting lots of different things there. So the thing also, the starting point for anybody when they're checking out the SDK or starting a new project is the assistant app. So what's happening with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I already mentioned in the beginning that we now made it a bit easier to add frameworks to projects with the assistant using the right-click open with option in Finder. We've also added quite a few things in the assistant and the functionality itself outside of this more infrastructure topic. So there's one thing that we've heard many times. Eventually, we got to implement it. Sometimes you do connect to backends that are not OData, and the assistant currently assumed that all the backends are OData. We always generate proxy classes, so that can then always generate UI on top of these proxy classes. Now we've loosened this up a bit, so we can now you as a developer define that you do not want to have proxy classes generated for non-OData destinations. So if you consume other REST APIs from Business Hub or other sources, that they'll now work fine in the assistant as well. And you can also not only decide not to have the proxy classes generated, but also not to have UI generated, but only the onboarding code itself. Because I've heard a couple of folks, including you, I think, Ian, saying that you generate the app and you delete all the UI and you go on with the onboarding. Now we kind of take this away, so you don't need to generate UI that you delete. You can simply select that I want to have onboarding only proxy classes, maybe not, and then you start essentially from a single view plain Xcode project that has onboarding and connectivity established, but no UI code that you maybe don't need. On top of that, we've also restructured the whole generated app as such. The goal has been to make it even easier and better to understand, to have it more self-explanatory what we have in there. We've also interspersed all the code with links into our API docs so that if you see a feature being used in the generated app, you can directly jump from the generated app to the API docs and more explanation on this feature. And one major improvement that we made, again, talking about onboarding, is that we have overhauled the onboarding implementation in the SDK so that we can now also use and incorporate onboarding in apps with much less code. It has been a bit of an annoyance to many people that there is this massive, many-page long onboarding code that we have in the generated app, which is not very easy and straightforward to understand if you're not in the details of it. Now we've added to the SDK more support for onboarding, and we are showcasing how that makes things easier in the generated app itself.
Excellent. It's fantastic. I mean, I do love the way that you've got all these options now to fit everybody's needs. So just in closing now, Andreas, we've gone through the machine learning, the UI controls, the assistant. What about actually the core stuff, the foundation? What about things like OData? Any changes there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the foundation, as it says, is the foundation of everything. We've been working on it and iterating over it for now almost 3 years, actually. So you can say probably things stabilize a bit, which is good. But of course, we do continue to invest in there as well. The biggest thing I would say is if you consider flows as part of foundation, that we have this new onboarding stuff implemented now that I already mentioned, which is now part of the assistant and the generated app. So this, I think, definitely you should check out. There's this new onboarding manager and onboarding session classes that reduce the amount of the code that you need to write significantly. We've also, around onboarding, implemented additional functionalities, new steps, so that also the usage consent handling is much easier if you now want to make sure that if users accept or reject consent of usage data collection in the flows, that it is respected by the underlying foundation implementation and the usage broker automatically, so developers don't need to do much at all anymore to implement data privacy compliant applications there. Yeah, you mentioned OData. So on the OData side also, we've done the little things. On the offline OData side, we made it easier, and we added a couple more APIs and capabilities to do the troubleshooting with the local ILO data tool, and also when it comes to conflict and error handling on the device, when synchronizations get out of sync, or backend and front end get out of sync, there's more APIs and options now how you can resolve conflicts and handle errors in offline OData as well. So if you are building offline OData apps, I think you will value what we're adding there, and you should definitely check this out as well.
Cool. So guys, there you have it. That's the SAP Cloud Platform SDK for iOS 3.0 SP01. And as I mentioned at the top of the CodeTalk, Andreas has a great blog online, so check that out. Andreas, thank you for taking the time. Oh, by the way, also, you'll also see on developers.sap.com, Andreas has created a new, really nice long video for our on our landing page for the SDK for iOS. So Andreas, thank you for that, and thank you for joining me today.
Very welcome, Ian. Talk to you again in May latest.